Okay, I think let's just wait for Prof to pop back. When he does, then we'll just start the session. Okay,
Okay, let's start. If it's me who should have popped back, I'm back.
Yes, yes. Let me just start the session briefly, Prof. I don't think Bongani will be able to just sort out the sound issue on time. But just to say that thank you for honoring the invite. This is the department's yearly teach-in.
Which department? Sorry, I didn't get the name of your department.
Oh, it's at the Rhodes University Department of Political and International Studies.
Okay.
At Rhodes University. And each year we have a teach-in seminars that spread out over 4 days with four different speakers on a usually topical issue. Of course, what would be a topical issue is the issue around COVID-19. But I think also the issue around what's happening in Mozambique and ISIS is quite important, particularly for the South African audience to also grapple with and perhaps have a deeper appreciation of what's happening there. Many times in this country, we struggle with sort of international issues and what's happening beyond South African borders. So I think it's quite important that we are holding this seminar, even in the context of COVID-19. I think for today we are going to deal with, I think Prof was obviously going to get into it in deeper, but we're looking at the Peace and Security Councils and SADC's responses to the insurgency in Mozambique. I would have to apologize because I don't have the bio again with me on hand. Bongani was supposed to be chairing this session, but I think after we're done with the seminar, then I'll get back to that. I hope that's fine with everybody. The structure is such that the first 30 minutes there is a presentation from Prof. Yusuf, and thereafter there could be a 30 or 20-minute Q&A session. I think many students are obviously aware of the structure, so perhaps let's just give that time to him. Just for housekeeping rules, I'm asking that everybody just mute yourself. Of course, you and once there is the Q&A session, once we begin, just either send a question via chat or raise your hand, and then we can just take it from there. All right, I think we are okay to start, Prof.
Okay, good afternoon. By rise of violent extremism since 2017, according to some people, my first contact with the violent extremism and actors of violent extremism in Cabo Delgado was in 2015, when I was contacted by a group of elders from Muslim elders from different villages and mosques and so on, because they said that their sons and daughters were being harassed by the police. They have been attacked. They've been accused of being members of some extremist Islamic organization. The only thing which we could do at that time was to try to see if the authorities knew of what was going on, if organizations which protect human rights were also, they knew what was going on and following. But it took a lot of days in 2015 to come to get data about it. So in the end, there was some problems in one village where the mosque, inside the mosque, there were some conflicts between different groups, and the police intervened, shot one of the kids who lost a leg, but there was no public information about it. This continued. For me, it was not a new thing, because I don't think that violence is something which comes out of Sorry, there is interference.
Yes, I'm just trying to mute that person.
Okay.
Yeah, you may continue.
The situation in the, for me, violence doesn't come from the sun or from the mountains. Violence comes from certain socioeconomic conditions, and also there are many factors which we have to take account into it. When we discuss organizations of extreme violence, there are some indicators that we have to consider. One of them is the youth bulge, means that the demographic pyramid is in a certain way skewed, and you have a huge amount of young people in that social structure. The second thing is repression. It means that there is no democracy, there is no dialogue, and the way that the state and authorities contact with youth and with dissent, etc., is always utilizing violence. The other indicator which is always present when you have these problems is the lack of employment for the youth, which we had already said. There is a huge amount of young people in the social structure, but also we have a problem of destruction of the ambient, what you call it, the ecology of the region is menaced in a certain way. And then you have also problems linked to access and ownership of resources. Generally, people tend to use a very simple phrase saying that when we have this kind of violence, it derives from the existence of huge mineral resources, etc. Some call it what you call it in English. Sorry, English is not my language, but it is some kind of yeah, I don't know how do you call it in English, but when you have resource course. I don't think resources can be can be coarse. Resources are there, and it depends how you're going to use it and how people who have access to this resource are going to benefit from it. Today, the situation in Cabo Delgado is a situation of war. Well, it didn't start in 2017, but in 2017, at least the officials, the government, etc., considered that a starting date with an attack near or in the district of Mocimboa da Praia. The capital of the district was attacked, and also there was an attack against another location in the same district called Awasi. At this moment, we know that in 2021 that there are about 3,300 people reportedly killed. I think that the number is is a guess estimate. I think that there are very many people dead, and there is no register of names of who have been killed, how they have been killed, etc. And we never know where people are. There are a lot of people who have been also displaced. Who is behind, or who is the organization which claims to be the movement organizing this? This organization has many names. Now, with the intervention of the United States, they have started to call them the Mozambican Taliban, whatever they call them, many different names, but they themselves call Ahlussunnah wa Jama. That doesn't mean anything. If you translate that into English, it means those who follow the book and the writings of the Prophet. So there is no Muslim in the world who doesn't follow the Quran and who doesn't follow the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. Locally, the population calls them Mashababu, which is a local way of saying Al-Shabaab, and Al-Shabaab means the youth. So we have this number of that, and we have about, my last calculation, again, it's always guess estimate, we have about between 800,000 and 1 million people who have had to, who left their houses, their permanent locals of places of inhabitants, and they have left their places, and they want to go back, I suppose, but depends. At this moment, the situation has, in a way, changed, but let's first also give some background. Generally, the Mashababu's violence targets civilians, distinguish the violent extremist activity in Mozambique, even among other militant Islamist groups in Africa. I told you about this 800,000 or 1 million internally displaced persons out of a total provincial population of 2.3 million. The violent extremist threat in northern Mozambique is not a religious issue. The violence extremist threat in northern Mozambique exploits underlying societal vulnerabilities of inequality, insecure land rights, and distrust of authorities. People tend to say, but you know, these things started in when petrol, oil, and gas was discovered in Cabo Delgado, when the big companies like Total, ExxonMobil, and others started to do their investments. So this created the conditions for war. Now, that is not true, because if you look at, and it is important, I am a historian, and it is very important to look at the long durée, at long period. Cabo Delgado was the place where we had the liberation struggle conducted by Frelimo from 64 to 74. In between, there was another small guerrilla group, who also others guerrilla groups who appeared in this war till 74. Then from 75, 76, there was the 16-year war led by Renamo, and now we have this war which is being led by the Machababos. As I said to you, that this threat is not something which you can say that they are, it's some external movement or they have support. Probably they have some support from elsewhere. I'm not very sure about it, but what we have to be careful is that there is always a tendency to say that this violence is always orchestrated, fueled, supported by external forces. There is always, an attempt to find the demon from outside, when it would be very important to look at the conditions of governance, as you all study international relations, also politics. We have to look to these are also the conditions which we have to look, and mainly as far as we know, most of the base of this movement is formed by locals, especially youth. There is always, as this is a region where the most of the population is Muslim, there is always a tendency to say that this is a Islamist rebellion or movement, but one has to be really careful, because a lot of there is, as members of this movement, there are people who are Christians, who are Protestants, there are people from different areas and with different religion. You could ask me, but how can we study that? It's very difficult to study this type of things in the war. But sometimes when you're doing field work, you have this strange way of finding sources. So one of my sources was someone who was a Muslim imam, and who helped the families to deal with their problems, and help also to, how do you say, to bury the dead. And when you have to bury dead in a war situation where people have been dismembered, etc., it's quite complicated. Sorry. Sim, estou numa reunião. Quem fala? Alô? Sorry. So what I'm saying is that it's very easy to find factors like religion, interference of people coming from other countries, say Tanzania, say Uganda, not directly the Ugandan government, but ADF, the movement which is fighting against Museveni, etc., etc. The fight against the risk of violence in northern Mozambique is spreading to other parts of the country. And probably from the beginning, I always thought that they were not only acting in Mozambique. I suppose that this group had some external support, but basically they use the whole region to circulate where they had support. Don't forget that you have considerable amount of revolt and capacity to revolt against governments all over the region in Southern Africa, but also you have linkages, religious, ethnic, friendship, etc., all over the place. These days now we're having some problems in Angola, we had problems in Tanzania, we had problems in Zambia, etc. In this fight against the insurgency, Mozambique has received support from many and some strange organizations, some during many years. Last 2-3 years, Mozambique was supported by private security companies. One of them was called the DAG Group, which came from South Africa. They were linked to Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, then they have their bases in South Africa, and they acted supporting Mozambican police in this combat. The history of the activity of DAG and the things they have done have to be studied. One of the main problems with these groups is that they violated human rights very intensively, and they used chemical weapons. At this moment, we have deployments by Southern African Development Community, of which Mozambique is a member. And we also have a 1,000 members strong Rwandan force in Mozambique. And we have training missions by European Union, Portugal, United States, etc. I don't, really as students, most of us have an idea of Rwanda's history in Southern Africa, because generally when we hear about Rwandan presence in Southern Africa is always that they have some kind of, they persecute their own political refugees, which have been killed in Southern Africa, in South Africa, in Mozambique, etc. And well, having them as partners of the Mozambican government is quite difficult to understand sometimes, because when they arrived, there was already a cry, a very strong cry by the Rwandan refugees in Mozambique that their lives were into danger, and there was even cases of 1 or 2 Rwandan refugees which were detained and disappeared. Naturally, Rwanda's intervention deployment in Cabo Delgado followed some meetings between the president of Mozambique, Rwanda, and France. Why France is important? France is important because their petroleum company Total had a 20 million investment in Cabo Delgado, and they were forced to withdraw its personnel, stop operations, and declare force majeure in April 2021. ExxonMobil and other companies have put on hold plans to develop an even larger onshore facility. I don't know many details, and I don't think anyone knows many details about this marriage between Rwanda, Mozambique, France because when Mr. Macron went last week, there were many people suggesting that France and Total were paying the army, the Rwandan army intervention in Mozambique. The president of Rwanda, Mr. Kagame, said that was not true, that they were paying their own bill. And as students of international politics and international relations, we know that there are no free lunches. On that visit was important. We have to take into consideration that at this moment, Rwanda is run by a government which came out from the huge massacre which took place in Rwanda, where one part of the population were trucidated, eliminated the other. There was a huge, there was terrible killings. After that, Mr. Macron came to South Africa, and I don't know what was the business. Probably he came to visit or see if there would be any possibility of investing in South Africa, because don't forget that the first South African atomic energy plant in Koeberg was installed by the French during apartheid. And there is always a talk of trying to put up, South Africa has this eternal need of energy and problems with energy. So there is always ways of looking at how you supply it. The plans of development of this petrol industry in Cabo Delgado has been put on hold, but they are capable. The Rwandese have come, and in the last, they say in 2 months, they claim to have stabilized the situation, but it's very difficult to say that you can solve a guerrilla problem which has roots in the people in 2 months. And we don't have exact information about what is going on. The official media and certain groups which do propaganda for the government generally tend to say that the data, the alternative data which is published, comes from the enemy, but journalists also have difficulties in traveling in these areas and find data, and people are really scared of speaking about their problems, etc. But the situation is a situation of... sorry. Sim, estou numa reunião, diz. Estou numa reunião. Até amanhã. It's very difficult to have an image of what's going on, but what we know and we have to do every day is to help people to not to be affected by the war. There is a hunger problem in this moment going on, and also is something which we have to take a constant and active role in promoting peace. From the perspective of the local communities in Cabo Delgado, the often repeated narrative that of the insurgency being part of a global Islamic State linked threat is a distraction from the true drivers of the conflict and threats, because people speak about local households, livelihoods, safety, and other conditions which have been destroyed, and they are also thinking that they have been forcibly displaced by the petrol companies and the local rich people, members of the elite, etc., which are linked to different business plans. The displacements in Cabo Delgado are really huge, and most of the population has left the areas where there is petrol, where is also mines, ruby mines, etc. And they have gone south trying to find secure areas, but they have also moved to provinces like Nampula and Zambezia, Niassa, etc. That is what we can follow. There are huge, you can find a lot of maps and data in the internet and by research reports about it. But we should understand, and I think it is important also for South Africa, because generally there are certain factors which are common. The crisis in Cabo Delgado starts with a stark trust deficit in government institutions, which are perceived as having long exploited local communities. I think I heard this type of talks when in some months ago, when you had all these problems in South Africa. I would hear people saying that, you know, the government had not done anything for them. Restoring the population trust in the government and those providing public services, police, security, healthcare, educators, etc. It's very important to create a conscience and a behavior from these people that helps to end this bloody upheaval. Doing so is essential to undermine the socio-psychological sway that the Mashababus have over the youth, which has swelled its ranks. You know, I did interviews. The last time I was in Cabo Delgado was 4 weeks ago, and generally I work in the field, and when I was speaking with IDPs, internally displaced persons, they would tell me, look, we want to go back home. And I would say, but look, you go home, there is war there. But they say, but we are in these camps. It's very difficult to live here. The land is not ours. We have to pay some kind of rent, even if the state organizes places for us to stay. These places already have owners, and they were also sent to, you can go and you stay here. The government said you have to stay here because in Mozambique there is no private property of land. But that's not true, because every bit of land has an owner, and people are, in fact, you have to tell me about the time. I lost control of the time. So
you have about 2 minutes, Prof.
Okay, thank you. So what I'm saying is that the relocation and settlements of the people is really a very problematic issue. And I also think that the situation which is occurring in Mozambique has occurred in other countries in the region. And I think that it will occur again. It is not something which will disappear by an act of magic. So I would like really to also call the attention to the need to study the structure of our populations. These things which you have regularly in South Africa, you had now, but then we also have these issues where people from Tanzania, Mozambique, Zimbabwe are persecuted by local South Africans, etc. These type of phenomena are really an indicator of some kind of disease which can explode. And just to finish is, look, if you look at my, you'll find in the internet my CV, but also if you look at me and two other colleagues, we have published regularly in the Africa Center organization, Africa Center for Strategic Studies in Washington, and you can find in French, Portuguese, and English most of our texts. And we have published regularly, and we have about 4 or 5 reports where we analyze the root causes of the war, we analyze the results of the war, and our last paper is about listening to the people of Cabo Delgado. And I think that even it is a teaching event, it is a way of listening to the people of Cabo Delgado. And it is also a way of listening to ourselves as citizens of Southern Africa, and also listening to our own people, because these issues are not new. Second, we have experience, you have had experience of, even with Islamic connotations, of revolts in South Africa, Pagad, etc. And we will have more. And this is not a religious thing. And if you look, because of 11th of September and all this US attempt to, and the Islamophobia which came with the war on terror, people lose focus. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Prof. That was an excellent presentation. I must apologize for the connectivity problem that I had at the beginning. As my colleague Tapero Tsilapeli mentioned, I had prepared your bio, which he couldn't read because I didn't share it with him. But for those of you who do not know Professor Yusuf Adam, he's a professor of contemporary history at the Eduardo Mondlane University. He holds a PhD from Roskilde University in Denmark. He has worked as a consultant for bilateral organizations, NGOs, and private companies. He has published extensively in English and Portuguese. So we will take questions and comments. So 3 questions at a time. Okay, so far there are no questions. Prof, I would like to invite you to amplify the last bit of your presentation about South Africa. I don't quite know whether you said what is happening in Mozambique could happen here, or that what is happening there has implications for what could happen here in South Africa. So could you please amplify or expand on that last bit of your presentation?
Thank you. I think that the the two questions, as you put it, are possible. One is that there are concrete conditions, socioeconomic conditions in South Africa to have this kind of, how do you say, this kind of upheavals. Why? Because people, the citizens, lose, don't have credibility. The government loses credibility. The state doesn't deliver services. The quality of health is amazing. The quality of education is terrible. So the salaries are low, etc. So these are the we would say they are these are the conditions to create a big upheaval, to create a revolt. And South Africa has had these problems. You had some months ago, you had all these things linked to, it's not something which you can only link to the fact that Zuma was detained. It's also linked to the long history of South Africa, race relations, also the way the state works, etc. Guptas didn't come from China, but they couldn't operate if they didn't have there were no local conditions for them to operate. Then we have also to look at Pagad. You had the history of Pagad in the Cape. I really don't think that there is some kind of, I don't have this vision which many US, many Americans or Europeans have of Islamic crusade going all over the world. And if we look at the countries where we have had huge spillovers of violence, we have to, we see that there is a responsibility of many Western countries. A good example is whatever we think about Libya. We had Lebanon. Now we had, these days we have these problems in Afghanistan, etc. Just to mention, there were a lot of Mozambicans and East Africans. I don't know how many South Africans were there, but when the Taliban were fighting in Afghanistan against the Soviets, the Taliban were supported by the US, by the Americans. There were many people which left our countries, I think South Africa too, which went and joined the Mujahideen to fight against the Soviets. Now, look, after 20 years, look the type of disaster which we're having. So it's very important. I think this talk should be about peace, how to maintain peace in our countries, how to create peace. And the creation and manutention of peace obliges us to think about the role our states play and the relationship between the state, this power which the state has, and the population. If the population doesn't have confidence in its government, really will have all these type of problems which we have. You see, South Africa is in a way a place where everyone who has difficulties in their countries, they try to go to South Africa because they find jobs, because there is a need of labor, etc. It is not for someone who comes from any other country. South Africa is not the land paradise full of milk and honey. It's a place where they have to work hard and make ends meet. And that is something which is important to think about it. Yeah, it's we have to work for peace. We have to work for democracy, transparency, and for the defense of human rights. I think that in most of the Southern African countries, including South Africa, the record of respect for human rights is very low. There is a talk by those who are in power that they respect it, but it's not there. The other aspect which has to be talked about is not only our formal economies, mines, etc., is the question of drugs. The whole region is an area where drugs are consumed. Before we had AAS, now we have others. There is huge amount of drugs circulating in the region, passing from here. You have cannabis is just nothing important, but you can speak about drugs which come from Southern America. Now, the amount of drugs which will come from Afghanistan and all these places, and our countries are big consumers of a lot of these drugs. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Prof. We have a question from Michael, and he's saying that threat seems to be coming from the seaside. And how can this threat be addressed in order to avoid a maritime problem?
It's not coming only from the seaside. The question is that the seaside is the sea is our main road from Northern Africa up to the Cape. And we know that, and we had a good example some months ago when the Suez Canal was blocked. We saw how important was the Mozambican Channel and the navigation through the Cape to the other areas. It doesn't come from it comes from the sea because the huge investments of petrol, minerals, etc., is being done on the coast. The population is being chased away one way or another. Practically, they're being chased away, not being paid exactly what they should have been paid. They are not part of these programs, although there is always too much talk, support to local communities, to local businesses, etc., but it is not done. And the question of the sea, we should look at the question of the sea in a long history perspective. Look, if you try to travel from Somalia up to the Cape, it's easy. You know, if you travel on a dhow, as I have done sometimes, from northern Mozambique up to center part of Mozambique, it was an easy trip. There was no no control. The captains knew where they could put the boat inside the bush in 5 minutes if they saw some kind of danger. And don't forget that the coast, there have been thousands and thousands of people who have died in their attempt to come to South Africa, Southern Africa, by boats, by using dhows, or being, how do you say, transported in strange ways. Recently, say in 2 weeks' time, I think, there was a group of 30 or 40 people from Ethiopia, which were rescued from the back of oil transport, gas transport, gasoline transport. You imagine transporting 40 persons inside a place which is normally to put will put where you put people. This time, I think they were safe. There were other disasters where they died. The question of tourism, I think, you know, tourism is important, but tourism doesn't promote development as it seems. We have nice, beautiful beaches, but for whom? For the Mozambicans, or for some crazy people who come from Europe or from South Africa, and they go around destroying the beaches with their 4x4